Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today we're doing a clinical autopsy, and I'm speaking directly to you, the certified professional coders, the CDI specialists, the clinical auditors, and of course our billing compliance teams. You're on the front lines of revenue cycle management, so you know exactly how frustrating today's topic is. We are tackling Part 8, Level of Service Downcoding and Upcoding Risks. And specifically, we're zeroing in on denial code CO150. Look, when a high-level E&M code fails a payer's algorithm, it doesn't just ding your bottom line, right? It literally opens the front door to massive regulatory audit scrutiny. So today, we're going to do a complete diagnostic breakdown of exactly why this happens and, more importantly, how we fix it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's how we're going to break it all down today. First, we'll deconstruct the CO150 denial itself. Then, we'll decode remark codes M25 and M26. Dig into the 5 root causes of downcoding, map out your audit and resolution workflows, and finally, wrap up with prevention and CDI coaching. Let's get to it. Starting off with Section 1, Deconstructing CO150 Denials. Let's isolate the specific symptom we're dealing with here. So what exactly is CO150? The strict, by-the-book definition is that the payer deems the information submitted does not support the billed level of service. In plain English, the payer is looking at your claim. Let's say you billed a high-level 99-2015, and they're flat out telling you, yeah, we don't buy it. They're saying your clinical documentation just doesn't have the complexity to justify the intensity of the care you billed for. And why should you care? Well, because consistent CO150s act like a giant flashing red flag to payer algorithms. It screams potential upcoding, which triggers compliance audits, clawbacks, and just intense regulatory scrutiny that nobody wants to deal with.
Before we go any further, though, we really need to clarify a crucial distinction that gets misunderstood way too often. Rejections and denials are not the same thing. A claim rejection happens pre-adjudication. Think of it like a bouncer at the door. It's usually just a formatting issue or a typo that stops the claim at the clearinghouse before it even gets into the payer's system. You fix the typo, you send it back. Easy. A denial, on the other hand, like our CO150, happens post-adjudication. The claim successfully went through, the payer actually reviewed it against their medical policies, and they officially denied it. That's a fundamentally different, much more complex clinical and administrative battle.
All right, moving on to Section 2. Let's decode remark codes M25 and M26.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how payers communicate their issues with your claim. When you get hit with claim adjustment reason code CO150, you are almost always going to see it paired or crosswalked with remark codes M25 or M26. And if you look at them, both of these racks carry the exact same heavy message. The information furnished does not substantiate the need for this level of service. They are explicitly flagging your claim for your clinical auditors, basically saying, hey, your clinical notes are completely out of whack with the EM tier you just tried to bill.
Which brings us to Section 3, the pathology. Let's look at the root causes of downcoding.
Based on the source material, there are 5 main culprits here. Number 1 is insufficient documentation. This happens when your clinical notes completely fail to back up the 3 core elements of medical decision-making, or MDM. You know the drill. We're talking about the complexity of the problems addressed, the data analyzed, and the risk of complications. If you bill a comprehensive 99215, but your actual MDM only supports a moderate 99213, bam, you're getting a CO150. Culprit number 2, blatant upcoding. This is simply assigning code levels way higher than the patient's presenting condition actually justifies, no matter how many pages of irrelevant chart fluff you happen to generate. Honestly, technology and convenience often become our biggest liabilities here. That leads us to the third cause, incorrect time-based billing. Look, you cannot bill prolonged EM visits based on time without documenting the exact face-to-face encounter minutes and explicitly detailing the nature of the counseling and coordination of care. Just writing "spent a long time with patient" is absolutely not going to cut it. The fourth major cause, EMR template defaults and note cloning. We all know how tempting the copy-paste shortcut is, right? It's the classic copy-paste syndrome, where a patient somehow miraculously has the exact same blood pressure and review of systems for 3 straight years. But remember, payers have highly sophisticated algorithms specifically designed to flag these exact boilerplate notes as non-compliant.
And that brings us to the 5th and final root cause, which really anchors the whole thing, lack of medical necessity. You can have the most beautifully formatted, lengthy chart entry in the world, but if it doesn't establish the clinical justification for why high-intensity care was needed, the entire claim collapses. For example, say a provider orders routine tests without any clear clinical indications documented in the assessment and plan. When the payer looks at that chart and thinks,
Wait, why did they do all this for a routine presentation? The claim is going to fail scrutiny every single time.
Let's transition to Section 4, Audit and Resolution Workflows. This is the active treatment phase.
So your workflow here needs to be incredibly systematic. Step 1. Isolate the exact denial reason on your EOB or ERA. Make sure it's actually a CO150. Step 2, and this is where the heavy lifting comes in, you have to validate the documentation and recalculate that MDM scoring against current AMA and CMS EM guidelines. Your internal auditors need to review the chart totally independently of what was originally built. Basically, did the provider actually hit the requirements for that high level? And then step 3 totally depends on what you find in step 2. You'll either have to correct the claim or prepare your defense.
So the crucial point is understanding that you really have two entirely distinct resolution paths. Path A, if your internal audit shows that the build level is genuinely unsupportable, like actually the note really only justifies a 99213 instead of the 99215 that was billed, then you have to refile a corrected, downcoded claim, or just accept the payer's adjustment. Seriously, do not appeal a weak chart. It's a waste of time. But Path B, if your documentation is clinically solid and the payer just flat out made a mistake, you fight back. Submit a formal redetermination or appeal. Attach the progress note, clearly highlight the specific MDM elements, include your physician's MDM calculation worksheet, and cite the exact AMA guidelines to prove your case.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Prevention and Provider Coaching. Let's talk about building a proactive defense. We need to sequence a continuous prevention feedback loop to protect ourselves moving forward. First things first, conduct regular, targeted provider training. Physicians absolutely need to understand the financial and compliance impacts of their documentation habits. Second, actively monitor your coding guideline compliance. And third, engage in continuous improvement through periodic internal pre-bill audits. You want to specifically target those high-level visits like the 99205s and 99215s. The goal here is to catch the mismatch before it ever leaves your facility. Furthermore, keeping these systemic defenses strong requires serious organizational alignment. You've got to ensure continuous cross-department communication between your clinical providers and your billing staff, so everyone agrees on what was performed versus what is actually billable. Drive those detailed clinical documentation standards. You can even implement technical safeguards, like configuring your EHR to create a hard stop, physically blocking a provider from signing off on time-based billing if they haven't entered the exact mandatory minute logs. And lastly, always stay informed on shifting payer policies, because those algorithms, they change all the time. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a critical question to take back to your practices and your providers today. Is your documentation genuinely telling the complete, complex clinical story of that patient encounter, or are you just efficiently checking default EHR boxes so you can get to the next room? Answering that question honestly is the very first step in eliminating CO150 denials for good. Decode Healthcare with Harshit.